Welcome again, everyone. We are very happy to have with us Dr. Anna Slavec from Young Academy of Slovenia, who's going to lead us through this first of several webinars that shall provide a good introduction how to conduct surveys, so we can, here at Eurodoc and maybe also in other places, improve the ways how we go about this and learn more then for our policy interactions or for whatever we are conducting these surveys for. And so this first part is under the title Recruiting Participants for Web Surveys. And yeah, Anna, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Sebastian, for the introduction. My name is Anna Slavec, and I'm a researcher at the Inrenew Center of Excellence, which is an interdisciplinary research institute, and I'm a member of the Young Academy of Slovenia. In Eurodoc, you might know me. In past, I was active as the co-coordinator of the Open Science group, and I had also talks about open science in the past, but my main research expertise is in social science statistics, and especially in the use of survey methodology, and in particular doing web surveys. And today I will talk about how to recruit participants for web surveys. Before I start, since we are a small group, I always want to start whenever it's possible with some ice-breaking question. So to have, some introduction in the topic, so that so that I see how much experience you have with it. So raise your hand if you participated in a survey in the last, let's say, in the last year. So, okay, I see some raised hands. What about in the last month? Did you participate in, okay, April now is short, but let's say March. So in March or April, okay, fewer than before, but still some people have participated. So we see that surveys are really used a lot. And do you remember how you were? So now this is a question that I should, for an online session, I should have rephrased it, because we're not in a classroom, but you're welcome to respond. So how were you invited? Do you remember? So did you receive an email, or were you invited online? So you received like an email, or were you invited on Facebook, maybe on Twitter, or was any of you maybe invited to participate in a survey by phone, or maybe in person to fill a form? Not so much. So we see that we are being surveyed a lot, but now lately mostly it's happening everything online. And what about so the other way around? Have you ever created a survey? Raise your hand if you ever created a survey. Yeah, okay. I also see some hands raised. And so how did you invite participants? This is maybe a lot to respond, but let me guess, probably you posted your link somewhere online. You asked, maybe you emailed it to colleagues and asked them, can you please forward this to other colleagues? Or you posted it to the to the Facebook website of your organization, and so on. So there are various ways how to do it. Okay, now a bit of an outline of the lecture. So maybe the title is a bit deceiving because it's titled Recruiting. So my first idea for the title was sampling for web surveys, but then nobody would participate because you would think, oh, this will be statistics, a lot of formulas, it will be very boring. But recruiting participants, if we want to do a survey in a scientific way, because we are all scientists, it's important that we are aware that surveys are scientific methods, and to conduct them properly, to get really accurate and precise results, we have to conduct them in a scientific ways and follow scientific procedures. So I will speak first in general about surveys as a social science method, then a little bit of introductions to survey sampling, but I promise like no formulas, just to have like this general concept, what it is about. Then how this gets complicated when we have web surveys, because we cannot do things that we were used to do when we like in traditional surveys. And I will also mention some other considerations that are important when conducting a web survey. Surveys are widely used in social sciences by researchers in different fields, but also not only by researchers, they're also used for public opinion polls, for market research, healthcare. So they have a lot of applications, and they are not used only by social scientists. It happens nowadays very often that even researchers in natural sciences and technology want to use surveys because maybe they produced something new, an innovation, and they want to test it, to market test what they developed and get some feedback about their product. So there are various reasons why somebody would conduct a survey, or maybe, I don't know, you're a researcher and you're involved in an organization, like many of you are involved in Eurodoc, and you want to conduct a survey for your association about your participants and so on. So there are many possible uses to a survey. And they're not used only narrowly in social science, they are used also by policymakers and so on. So there are a lot of uses of surveys. If we want to place the survey inside social science research, we have to consider that with surveys, what we are measuring is usually either behaviors or attitudes, or maybe both. Surveys can be also used to measure knowledge, but usually researchers are not so much interested in knowledge. Usually it's about either behavior or attitudes about something. Surveys are not the only methods can be used. They are a quantitative method. We have to be aware that they are not the only method. So we have methods that are more qualitative, like cognitive interviews, we have focus groups and other qualitative methods, and on their side we have surveys and other quantitative research methods. So surveys are a quantitative method that we use when what we want to measure is more like not so much complex, but more general, more extensive. So not intensive like in qualitative research, but it's extensive. And when we are focused on attributes and dimensions, and not so much on cases and units, and especially when we deal with many cases. So in qualitative methods, we are limited to a few cases. When we conduct a survey, we are doing this measure on a lot of cases. The survey research is actually not so old. I mean, there were surveys even before the 20th century, but they were not really scientific. So they were forms when people wanted to collect information for the government. But like the real start of the survey research as we know today, it started in the 1930s with the invention of sampling statistics. And the golden era was in the 1960s with the expansion of technology, when we had computer-assisted telephone survey. In households at the time, people didn't have computers, but researchers who were conducting surveys, they have computers, not the computers that we use today, but computers that were able, then to analyze, with which they were able then to analyze. And it started in the 1960s, and especially then in the 1980s, there were a lot of telephone surveys, and it was very easy to do it because people were at home. So you wanted to conduct a survey. People didn't have the dynamic lives we have today, where you cannot really catch people at home. At that time, it was really easy. In the afternoon, you made a call, and people were home, and they responded, and it was like a really nice era. Everything got really complicated in the 1990s. You would think that with the invention of the internet, it would be easier to conduct surveys for researchers, but actually it got really complicated because there are so many, it's so decentralized, there are so many habits, so many different lifestyles, and it's really difficult when the society became so complex to really research it. We have a growth of different modes of data collection, but at the same time, a big decline in response rate. It is much it's much difficult now to get people to respond to surveys. That's also because maybe of over-surveying. When people get surveyed a lot, they don't want to participate anymore. So it's becoming a bigger and bigger challenge for researchers to participate, anyone to then really participate. And in some cases, we have like big social science surveys that if they receive a 60% response rate, they are happy. In marketing research, they're happy with as much as, I don't know, around 15%. So the response rates are really low. And another thing that is new is that there is a lot of combining of survey data with other sources of data. There are even people who are saying we will not need any surveying anymore because we have, all this other information about society that we can use. But with this passive organic data that you collect about people, about their behaviors, let's say online, you cannot really respond to all the research questions. I mean, there are things that people, also when they, produce maybe some content online, there are things people speak about, but there are also things people don't speak about. So we just, passively waiting for information. There are things that people don't speak about. So you need to ask them in either an interview or focus group in a survey to get a response. So passive data collection of administrative sources, of, I don't know, online sources that people tweet, it's never going to be enough for researchers to respond to all the questions they have. To really come to, sometimes what you need to do is like to really design a scientific survey or any other method that you can then also that you can get responses to your research question. So as I mentioned, traditionally other survey modes were used. We distinguish between interviewer administered and self-administered. Web surveys are self-administered. So you have a person who is responding to a survey. There is no interviewer. In the past, you had, even now, interviewer-administered surveys are still used by statistical offices and other organizations. We have face-to-face surveys, telephone surveys, where you have a person actually asking questions. A web survey is self-administered, so the respondent is alone with the survey. And it's in this way very similar to a mail survey. On the other hand, with technology, especially now with artificial technology, you can also make the survey like very interactive. So the technology is doing some of the things that interviewers are doing. So a web survey is allowing a researcher to do much more than, a traditional mail survey. And of course, web surveys are computer administered. Okay, so this might seem like really confusing. I just wanted to show you like the process of designing how you come to a survey statistic, like what is the background. So we have at the same time when we are preparing a survey, the measurement part and the representation part. So the measurement part means that preparing the questionnaire, and the representation part meaning deciding what is the population and the sampling. Today, I'm talking just about this part, so the representation, how to select participants, how to invite them. I discussed also with Sebastian that maybe later in the year, in autumn, I can have a similar lecture about how to design survey questions. But today, I'm just like talking about this question. So how to recruit participants in a scientific, for a scientific survey or also other surveys. So from population to a sample and then getting a survey statistics. So a few words about survey sampling. First thing we need is to define what our population is. A lot of time I notice that people, they just say, I just want to study the general population, like everyone. But that's like the most difficult thing to do. Usually it's much easier to have a small, to define the population a bit more. So like the minimum is like to just select, the age range. If you just say general population, everyone, it's, you cannot, it's like not easy to survey kids, you have to have the permission from the parents. So having at least, I'm just serving people who are from 15 to, I don't know, 65 years old, so to have an age range. And then you need a sampling frame, which is a list of all the units in your population. And this is where things get complicated, because sometimes for some populations you have a list, sometimes you don't. If you are a survey researcher in the United States, there is no list of all the people in the population. Here in Europe, researchers, like, we are very spoiled because our government has administrative records of our population. So the statistical office can make a sample of, when they do their surveys, they can make the sample from the population. Many European countries have this, which makes official statistics really easy. Countries that don't have that, they need to use other methods, and it's more difficult than to conduct surveys of the population there. But we don't have just general population surveys. We have also surveys of smaller population, like you are your university, and you can do a survey of your university, and then your sample is all your employees. But you can, also more strictly define. You say, I don't want to survey all the employees. I just want to survey all the employees that are researchers. So I'm not going to survey those who are administrative staff, depending on the topic. Sometimes you want to include everyone, even administration. Sometimes no, you just survey researchers. Or you can do a survey of your students who is enrolled. So you have a list of all the students that are enrolled. And university has a list of all the students that are enrolled, and they can survey them. But what if you want to do a survey where you want to include several universities, not only your university? It gets more complicated, because you need to then ask, to get, if you wanted to have a list of all the units, like the list of all emails of students who are enrolled at the university, it's something that you will not get, because they will say, oh, we cannot do that because of data protection issues. So it's something that if you are out of an organization, it's really difficult then to make a sample from that organization. But you can maybe ask them, could you share it in your internal newsletter or something? So there are other ways how to approach that. But that way you cannot really do a sample. So things can get really complicated. Looking at this picture, what I want to also to stress is that the population and the sampling frames of the list of all units, they do not necessarily overlap. It's very difficult, like even in official statistics surveys, there is no complete overlap. You have, maybe you have units that, I don't know, died, but this is not something that is being instantly recorded. So you are doing a survey, and you will always maybe have some units that are not in the sampling frame, because it's not being updated on a daily list, on a daily rate, and some information, it can be outdated. Even with a university, the university doesn't have, maybe always records in real time. They can have, but not necessarily. So you may have someone who is not enrolled to the university anymore, but it's still maybe included in the survey, and so on. And then, based on this sampling frame, you do a sample. And this sample is, a small segment of the whole population that you target with your survey. There are also surveys that do a full population. You invite everyone in your population to participate. If it's a small university, you would invite everyone to participate. If it's a large university, it doesn't make sense, because to burden everyone with the survey, or maybe if it's a survey, on the whole country or all European countries, then, it's too, having so many people survey, it's a big burden to them and to you. So you just do a sample of the population, and based on this sample, you make an inference to the population. But here the question is, how can we be sure that on this small sample of the population that we want to describe, that we can make an inference from sample to population? But before we respond to that question, there is another question. How many participants do we actually need? Here is a table with some calculation. What is the sample size? What is the suggested sample size for different kinds, for different population sizes, and for the desired confidence level and margin of error? And you can see that with the population size, it first increases. You know, the larger the population, the more people the more units you need. But you know, at a certain point, if you know, when you come to here to 10,000, you see that increasing the population size, the recommended sample size doesn't increase. So after you reach a certain level, the accuracy of a survey doesn't increase anymore with a larger size. So it's more the question about it's your confidence level, and so the accuracy and precision. And this misconception that size is really important is very popular. A lot of times people think, oh, I just need a big sample. You know, also reviewers have this mindset. We just need to gather a lot of participants and everything will work okay. But this kind of thinking can lead us to big problems. And this is a famous example from history. But it's not so famous that you would hear about it. But it's a story that I always try to include because it's like very it's an important lessons to learn that size is not everything. So in the United States in 1936 they had an election, and before that date this magazine, Literary Digest magazine, was very popular, and for every election, this magazine just mailed, because at that time they didn't have email, so it was a letter survey. They sent this form to all of their subscribers and asked them to respond who they're going to vote. And every year they did that. And in 1936, it was especially big, the sample. They mailed 10 million questionnaires to their readers, and 2.4 million responded, so a really large number. And they predicted that Robert Landon was going to win the election. On the other hand, we had a much smaller sample, a quota sample of just 50,000 people, and so much smaller than these 2.4 million, but had the advantage that they had control over demographic characteristics. And their prediction was different. So they predicted that Roosevelt was going to win. And if you know history, the correct answer was, the correct prediction was that Roosevelt was then the winner of the election in that year. So what did Literary Digest, the magazine, what did they do wrong? What they did wrong was that their readers were not representative of the American population. In general, their readers were wealthier than the American population. So, and people who responded, people who subscribed to their magazine, so people who couldn't afford a subscription to their magazine, they couldn't, you know, they were not invited to participate. But in the election, everyone had the possibility to vote. So having this control over the demographic characteristics enabled this George Gallup, who was a statistician, to successfully predict. And in the United States, Gallup is still a company, one of the companies that is doing election polling and also other kind of research. Okay, so what we learn is that size of the sample is not all that matters. So what is the thing that really matters when we are designing a survey if size is not important? So already before I was talking about accuracy and precision. When we increase sample size, we increase how accurate our prediction is, but now how precise is. So here we have, first example, we have something accurate and precise. The second picture, we have something that's not precise, but it's accurate. And then we have really precise, but not accurate, and not precise, neither accurate. So the example from the Literary Digest magazine, they're the third picture, you know, they were really precise because they had 2.4 million respondents, but their what they predicted was wrong, because they just cared about the sample size. So what is this other thing that we have to care about? It's how well the sample represents then the population. George Gallup did it in using quota sampling, but quota sampling is not the only method. So sampling methods, in general, we divided them into groups: probability sampling and non-probability. And the method that George Gallup used, quota sampling, is actually a non-probability method. So it's not a method that would be used, for example, it's not that is used in a scientific way by researchers and statistical offices. Usually for official surveys, we have probability samples, and there are different kinds, but I will not go into details. What I want to talk about today is how to do that for web surveys, because in most cases, as you know, researchers who want to do a survey nowadays, because we have very limited funds, we want to do a web survey. Because we don't have the funding to, we don't always have, sometimes we have funding, sometimes we don't. So when we don't have a funding, sorry, doing an online survey is our only option. And so having a probability sampling is not an option for us. But even when we are using non-probability sampling in web surveys, there are ways how to do it in a better way, or doing it in a non-good way. How different methods for web surveys differ is sometimes they're based on a list, sometimes they are non-list based. So in general, if we say that it's list based, it means that we have a list of units. So we have a sampling frame. And if we have a sampling frame, we can do probability sampling, but not necessarily. It can also happen that we don't have a list, but it's still probability sampling. And that's in the case of, intercept surveys. So when we survey website visitors, we don't have a list of them in advance, but there, theoretically, there is a list of everyone, of visiting a survey. So if we do, if Eurodoc would do a survey of everyone that visits their website, that it's like probability sampling, because they can decide every 10th visitor of our website will respond to a survey, and that's a probability survey. Because we know the probability of, so if you remember from the previous slide, the definition of probability sampling is that there is a known probability that somebody is on the list. The other way of doing a probability sample online is if we have a survey of a specific internet population. Let me give you an example. Let's say we want to study, let's say we have an Facebook group, like Eurodoc has the, how is it called? The Facebook group of Eurodoc open, so forum or something. So we have, so we can reach everyone on that Facebook group. So we post a survey there, and we have, a complete, Eurodoc has the complete list of people who are members of that group. Or another example is if Eurodoc organizes an event, so an event like today, people register for that event. And Eurodoc has the email of everyone that participates at the event. So if you do a survey among participants of a certain event, not necessarily online event, maybe Eurodoc conference, that's a probability sample because everyone that participated in the event has the possibility to be sampled in that survey. So if we have like a very specific population, that's then very easy to do because you have a complete list. If another example of that is mixing an online surveys with contact information we have about participants from other sources. I will, on the next slide, I have like an example for that, for a survey I did among companies, where we had, the list of emails of our companies, and we send them an invitation on their postal address, and it included a link, and there was the possibility that they responded online. So in this case, if we do a survey of the general population, we can get from the statistical office, we ask them for a sample. There is a fee so that they prepare it, and you send a letter to the population, and you invite them to participate to your online survey. So this is one of the way of doing it, so the mixed surveys. And then there are no probability sampling ways, where we are dealing with incomplete lists of the target population. And sometimes they're based on a list collected by self-selection, or we can use non-probability online panels. In the next slides, I also have an example of that. But these non-probability samples, they are very different in their quality. Some can give you a representative sample, some don't. So it really depends on how much they invest in their quality. But most of the surveys done is unrestricted web surveys, so by self-selection. So they're very biased. This means that you have a survey, and then you post, like you send. So what we were talking at the beginning, we had the ice-breaking question. So you want to do a survey, and what you do, you ask everyone you know. You send an email to all people you know. You send an email to your coworkers. I want to do this survey. Can you please help me and send this to everyone you know? That's like snowball, if you also ask them, can you please share it with others? But the problem with this approach is that it's, very not scientific, because this way you get the respondents, just those who are similar to you. So the responses are then biased. And the results, you can do an analysis, but that's just limited to a descriptive analysis. You cannot make then an inference to your studied population. Okay, so a few examples. So this is an example of a mixed mode survey where we combined a postal letter. So we sent an invite by regular post because we had a complete list of the population, and they were invited then to respond online. And then here I want to show you an example of two surveys that I did. One was on the topic of COVID protection measures, and one was on the topic of vaccination attitudes. And in both cases, I did these two surveys like pro bono, like helping a group. In the first case, protection measures, I helped the organizations of young doctors in Slovenia. They wanted to do the survey, and that was, in 2020, at the first year of the COVID pandemic, and they did their survey on their own, and they just, they were like just. They wanted, to get as many participants as possible, and they were contacting various organizations. But the survey was done, in a really quick way, and they just wanted to collect data really quickly. And I was able to convince them, to do it maybe in a more scientific way, and I found there is a marketing research organization that offered to do this pro bono, because at that time, COVID was like really an important issue. So they were also interested to study that. And so they offered their panel for free. And their panel is representative of the population in Slovenia. And so we did this survey in the same week in parallel. And one way of doing was this approach of going online, posting the link on Facebook, sending to different organizations, to their contacts, friends, family, and so on, and asking them, please share this. And that way we get more than 5,000 responses. So it was like very successful, because at the time COVID was a really important topic. And so this was like spread, also some help by some organizations, social media. So it had a big reach. In the same week, this marketing organization, that they have their panel that they curate. So they have control of their demographics. So because they're using it for their purposes, and their sample is they use it regularly for different kind of service they do as marketers, and they offered us so they sent this survey to their panel, and 527 panelists from their panel responded in the survey in the same week. So this was happening in the same week in parallel. And now we have the comparison of these 5,000 responses to this 500. And in the next slide, you will see what happened. And a similar story 1 month later, also related to COVID, but it was not about protection measures. It was about vaccination attitudes. I was approached by medical students at the university in Slovenia. And it was like the same thing happened, they just wanted to spread this survey to everyone they know, to use this large convenience sample. And they did it. And I offered them the listing. And luckily, this company was willing to do this also for the students. So there were 516 panelists from this company that participated. And these students, they were really motivated, even more than the young doctors. And they reached more than 12,000 respondents. Actually, it was 16,000, but we removed 4,000 because they were incomplete. So a really large sample. And now, if you had to guess the quality of the survey, of the results, would you say it is better the 500 participants or here the 5,000 and 12,000? So because you listened before to the story of Gallup, you probably now you're already seeing where I'm going. I want to show you how this smaller sample, even if it was smaller, got us to better results than this large convenience sample based on asking people online to participate. So let's see the comparison. So for this first case study, we had COVID-19 protection measures. And here I have the comparison of responses. So this large sample, non-list based, and this smaller sample that was list based, we asked them if in that last week, if they had 2 or more symptoms, or if they were in a risky contact. So we see a large bias. So in this large sample, 10% of respondents had a risky contact, while in this smaller sample, which is more representative, twice as much, 21%. So it's a big difference. And which one is then closer to the real situation? So given how quickly the virus was spreading, like this 10% is like really underestimated, And the problem was that this was done by the Association of Young Doctors, and they were sending it to other doctors. So the most people who participated were doctors. So of course they were more careful. They were sending it to their familiars, so people who are more careful. But when this was shared in the general population, we see that there were more people who had these risky symptoms. So the sample was less biased. And then we see that also, have you been in the workplace at least once in the last 7 days? We see that this large sample underestimated how many people have been at the workplace, because at the time only people who didn't have the option to work at home were allowed to go to the office. But we see that, you know, in reality, so there were more people than was reported in this large sample. Okay, there were also some indicators where there is no difference. Oh, and then we have this one, wearing masks. So this large sample of people who are similar to you as a researcher, we see almost 60% were wearing masks correctly. But when you asked the general population, the marketing panel, we see that the percentage of people who wore masks correctly was just 44%, which we then later realized is more close to the real situation in the population. Of course, neither of them is, you know, the true population measure, but this smaller sample, because it's list-based, so because it's closer to the scientific way, gets us better results. And then but at the end, you know, all this effort of collecting this large sample didn't go in vain, because there are advantages of having large samples. For example, we were able to compute also differences between regions. This one, smaller, of just 500 participants, we couldn't calculate differences in regions because it was too small. In this larger one, we were able to. Okay, let's move to the second case study. This was about vaccination, and it was very similar. This large sample said, based on that, almost 60% of people said they will get vaccinated, probably or definitely. And then on this one, because again, this was medical students, and they sent it to other medical students, so there was a lot of medical stuff in the sample. In this smaller sample, we got the result 50%. And we did it, this was in December 2020. And the media, when they heard the results, to them it seemed really low. In later months, so in 2021, they realized that we were actually right. So the media didn't even want to report our survey because they thought we were wrong. Because they thought, oh, of course everyone is going to get vaccinated. You know, at the time, the discussion in December 2020 was, oh, of course everyone wants to get vaccinated. The problem was that the vaccines were not really available. And then in March, April, when the vaccine was really available, then, you know, the ministry and the health organizations, they realized, oh, we have the vaccine now, but people don't want to get vaccinated. So at the time, they became aware that this fear of vaccination is a problem. And actually then our estimate was closer to this true situation. So we were right that, you know, a lot of people will not want to get vaccinated. But again, the problem, so again, if we go now to the comparison of this large and small sample, this large sample, there was a lot of medical professionals, so it allowed us also to do then the analysis between different healthcare professions, and we were also able to see there is a big difference between physicians and medical students. So sometimes, you know, if the aim of your survey is not to get an estimate of the population, you can also get valuable data. So based on this large sample of 12,000 respondents, we were able to do an analysis comparing different medical professionals. So all this data collection was again was also then useful. Some recommendations for further reading, and I want to allow some time for questions. So I want to go quickly through this last slide. There are also other considerations. So it's not all about recruiting participants. So it's also about how to develop the question, how to write the introduction, the wording of questions. It's really important also to pre-test the survey and so on. If you're interested, I can have a similar lecture for this webinar series sometime at a later point. But today I want to move the question that probably all of you are asking yourself: how to conduct a social science research in a scientific way if you don't have the funds for a proper survey. So the example, so this is probably the question that you all want the response to, because the marketing panel the COVID survey, they did it for free. They did it pro bono, like I helped the students for pro bono. But if we had to pay, that's thousands of euros, having access to a panel like this. And even that panel is not really completely representative of the population. There is also the possibility to get a sample from the statistical office, but this means then you have to either have interviewers and pay them, and they have to, and all the printing. So any direction you're looking, you see, if I want to do social science research in a scientific way, it's very expensive. But if I don't have any funds, can I do it in a proper way? I think so, but not necessarily a survey. So first thing you can do is that you narrow your survey population to a population for which you can get access to a sampling frame. So in your project, you develop some new product and you want to test it, and you cannot do a market study of all the European consumers, but you can say my population is, I don't know, I developed let's say a toy, and I will do a survey of Facebook groups of parents. There are on Facebook several Facebook groups of parents, and you say, I will do a survey, and my population is not the general population. My population is these Facebook groups. And that way, if you're a researcher, you can actually publish something because, what you're doing, it matches this population. So narrow your population down. You cannot do the findings for the general population, but for this limited population, you can. Or maybe you're studying mental health, you cannot do it for all universities in Europe, but you can do a study that is valid for your university, and so on. So this is one possibility. Second possibility, sometimes, doing a survey is not really necessary. There are various sources of existing surveys, and maybe for your research question, you can find data that is already existing, so you don't even need to collect. Third option, instead of doing a quantitative survey, you can do qualitative research. I think qualitative research is really undervalued, but it has several advantages. And sometimes if a topic is not really explored, you can get really valuable responses if you do, like deep interviews, instead of having this long quantitative survey and sending it to several participants that then do not represent your population. Instead of that, you can just interview a few people and do qualitative research. So this is another option. I'm not saying that it's like completely for free. You need funds also for that. It's a lot of time then to code responses and so on. But it's something, if you have time, is accessible to you if you don't have the funding to really conduct, to do sampling in a proper way. Okay. At this point, do you have any questions? Yes, Matthew, hi.
Hi, Anna. Thanks so much for that deep dive. I think I learned more about surveying in the last hour than I have in the preceding 34 years of life. I have a quick question, which perhaps is a bit more of an art rather than science, which is that I think in research advocacy, we can all safely say we often work with sort of non-list-based sampling, and that it is often self-selecting, that we get the kind of most vocal individuals that will have, extreme opinions, and it's hard sometimes to get that middle ground. But this is kind of like a norm. It's an accepted reality, particularly when you're working across lots of organizations, member states, and so on. Politically, how do you kind of influence change towards, kind of more systematic data collection? So, for example, if you're trying to look at like regions, universities, PhD candidates, and that it would make more sense to have like synchronous lists of all of those rather than, as you suggested, kind of, snowballing style surveys that only go out to like a particular sample. Politically, how have you kind of like influenced that kind of change?
Thank you for the question. It's a very difficult one. It's really difficult because there is, everyone thinks they can do a good survey, and everyone is doing, and they're so popular, and there is so much surveys around. And on the other hand, there are really, not enough experts on this topic that can help, because if I have the time, or if I'm like paid to do it, I'm like happy then to help. But, I have then limited resources. There are, of course, also other experts, but there is so much need for this kind of advice that it's really difficult. And I don't know, a lot of times, even if a university has a department specialized on that, on data collection statistics, they don't ask for help. They think, oh, this is something I can do. And then there is also the issue of data protection. So there is a lot of problems, and I'm like trying to speak and advocate and tell people maybe it's not necessary to always do a survey, but it's really difficult because they are really, really so popular. And every time you have a working group, so what we're going to do in this working group, let's do a survey. Or every time the response is, let's do a survey. I think one thing that would make a really big difference, I always, when I talk to doctoral students, I tell them, but a lot of times the graduate thesis, so the thesis, okay, for a PhD thesis, I think sometimes it makes sense to do data collection, but sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes, for a certain research problem, I tell students, you don't really need to collect your own data. You can use existing sources. And then they go to their supervisor, and the supervisors tell them, yes, but then that's not original research. And I tell them, no, research can be original even if you use existing sources. So a lot of academics have this preconception that original research means you need to collect it. No, so there is a lot of data that it's already collected, and it's not used like it's used one time, or not even one time, and then it's just sitting there to be used. But especially the undergraduate level. So as a supervisor, I wish all supervisors would tell their students, please don't do another survey. Go to a data depository. They have data, because you are doing an undergraduate thesis and you need to decide what you're going to do, and then you decide for a topic, you design a survey, collect data. There are several theses done in this way because the supervisors want, this is what they expect. But reality is that the student, it would be much easier for them if they would just go to a data depository, find a survey there on a topic that's interesting to them, and they would do their undergraduate thesis on that. But again, their supervisors want them to collect data, and there is so much, resources spent on that, so many hours the student is working on collecting that, and then the added value is not, it's not bigger than if they would just go and use existing data. So this is like on the student level. If we think about organizations, at the same time, a lot of organizational resources being spent on something that could be done in a less wasteful way. So it's a really good question, but I'm afraid I don't have a response how to change the mindset, because it's became part of this culture that everyone is doing surveys everywhere without thinking about the bigger context, the bigger picture, of, spending less resources and having more. So all this data is being collected, but at the same time, not being exploited in a good way. And when I speak about these topics, I feel like really lonely because I think there are not enough people speaking about these topics. I'm really glad and thankful for Eurodoc for this opportunity, because I really want to speak more about it, but there are not many occasions. There are a lot of occasions when I'm asked to help in surveys, but what I want to do is to tell people, maybe you don't need to do a survey. This is what I want to speak about. Any other questions?
Maybe I can have a question indeed, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned before that one good source for like limited population to get to such a list could be, like, for example, the Facebook group, this European PhD forum that Eurodoc has.
Yeah.
And even for those like limited populations, one thing that I'm sort of concerned with is that also there we have quite some like self-selection biases, right?
Yeah, of course, because not
One
everyone uses
particular example is one that's also sort of obvious in the participants today in the webinar, and one that we see also in the organization over and again, which is that the gender balance does not match what we see neither in the general population nor in specific the population of early career researchers or academics. So that there is obviously some self-selection bias going on, and I would expect these kind of biases then also to try and address them more through this, what probably is going to then be the content of the next next webinar, with how to design it properly to have like control questions like you showed before with the medical stuff. So to have these kind of control questions to at least learn something, how biased or like self-selected or however skewed maybe our actual respondents are. So this seems to be somehow difficult, even with this advice of starting off with a like limited population. So
yeah, I agree. So let's take this example of like if Eurodoc wants to do a survey about their members, there is inherently this bias that the people who are members of Eurodoc are not representative of all the researchers. People who are members of Eurodoc and other national organizations are researchers who care more about these topics, who know more about these topics. So if you do a survey among members of the associations, that's not representative of the full population of researchers. It's very biased. And so I think it's just important, as you know, the people, as the one who conduct the study, to be aware just when you report the results. What is important is that you don't say I'm reporting the opinion of all researchers. I'm reporting the opinion of researchers who are members of association. So, just to be careful about defining the population. So it means, okay, I did a survey, but this survey is not representative of all. It's representative of those who are members of an association. If you go on Facebook, it's representative just of people, of researchers who use Facebook. So it's just, a matter of being aware that what we are doing, we cannot make an inference to the population, to the general population. We can just make an inference to a narrower population. It's just being aware of to whom we can make an inference. So it's just a matter of when reporting to be really careful a bit about this, because when we publish results of a survey, then the media, when they report about it, they really like to quickly jump to conclusions. So with media, you have to be really careful that you tell them, yes, but this is not representative of all researchers. This is representative of a subgroup of researchers. And there is certain bias, and usually the direction of bias. So it's just about being careful, because we are scientists, so it's good that when we speak about something, we speak in a way that we know something, but what we know has certain limitations. So this is about being aware of what the limitations of our research are.
thanks, yeah, that's, I think, really very insightful. So are there any more questions? I see that some people already had to move along since it's this slot along the lunch break. Are there still maybe is there some last pressing question that you would like to put forward? Doesn't seem to be the case. Yes, Irina.
Thank you very much. It was so clear that no questions, because it's really cases from the life. We are thinking that in theory it works in one way, but in practice it's a little bit different. And you should know so many things, so many slight points that could work in one case but doesn't work in other case. So I think it's everything about experience. But it would be interesting to have one more webinars, more detailed how to do, because we don't have so many experience like you.
Yeah, with Sebastian, we were already discussing, but because of my limitations now, I said, let's have maybe first one about recruiting participants, and then in autumn, I can have another one focused on how to really ask questions. Actually, that's more of my expertise than recruiting participants. So we can have a session focused on how then to really spot what is a good question, what is a bad question, and
be very handful. Thank you very much, Anna.
you're welcome.
Indeed, yes. Thank you so much for this nice webinar. And yeah, looking forward to the next session then to go into more details how to really bring this up. So yeah,
Okay.
thank you very much.
So thank you for inviting me, and we will be in touch.
Yes.
Bye-bye.